I want to share my story with you about why I've devoted my life to ending female genital cutting. Now, I used to have an entirely normal life. I used to be in the corporate world. I spent 15 years involved in transport and infrastructure, and I worked on projects like congestion charging, Crossrail, the Olympics. But in 2007, I decided to press Control-Alt-Delete for myself. And I ended up volunteering in Ethiopia. And I went with VSO. And VSO takes professionals and it says to them, this is the world of development. So I learned overnight about poverty, HIV and AIDS, malnutrition. But no one told me that 75% of all women in Ethiopia undergo female genital cutting. No one told me that 3 million girls a year are at risk of being cut in Africa alone. And certainly no one told me that the average age a girl is cut at is under 5 years old. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, my first instinct was to look away. This is too difficult. It's too hard to even comprehend. And you know, I did quite well with that strategy for a few months. And then something shifted for me. I found myself in Lalla-Maharajh, which is up in the north of Ethiopia. And if anyone wants to go on a holiday, it's the most incredible place. It's very spiritual. And I spent the day wandering around the ruins and the ruined churches. And there were 2 little girls, and they were playing with me, and they were holding onto my fingers as we walked around. And they were trying to sell me knuckle bones of saints, 2,000-year-old knuckle bones. And I bonded with these girls, Mekdes and Tinabab. And here they are. And I had a moment where I thought, okay, I'm going to go and beg their parents not to cut them. I'm going to say I'll pay for their education, I'll do whatever I can. And in that moment, I knew I had no language, no rights, no legitimacy. And I walked away from them. But also in that moment, I made a vow to myself. I didn't know what I could do, but I would do whatever I could to end female genital cutting. So I came back to London and I knocked on lots of doors and I said to everyone, why does this happen? How does it end? Those were my 2 questions. And what I got was this huge outpouring of, this is barbaric, this is mutilation, these parents are torturing their children. But what I knew, because I'd lived with an Ethiopian family, is they're just like any of us. They love their daughters. And I couldn't reconcile these 2 very different discourses within myself. On the one hand, torture, on the other hand, love. I also found out more about female genital cutting. It is the forcible removal of a girl's external genitals. It's everything from cutting out the clitoris to cutting out the labia, no anesthetic. In the most extreme cases, the external genitals are completely cut out, and the wound that's left is sewn closed. There's a tiny hole that's left for urine and menses, but the scar tissue heals and basically seals the entire vaginal orifice. How do you have sex? How do you give birth? Well, you're then cut open enough to have sex, at the age either you're about to be married, and each time you give birth, you're cut again and resewn. 200 million women are living with the devastating impacts in 45 countries around the world. So here I was walking around London asking my 2 questions, and I spent a year volunteering, and I sort of got to the end of my tether, and I was thinking, shall I go and help build Crossrail 2? And something happened. A friend sent me a link to a competition on YouTube. I entered it, and I ended up being shortlisted. I was competing against one guy who had 1 million followers on Twitter. I had 63. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for it. So against all odds, I went for it, and I managed to win this competition. The prize was, with 3 days' notice, to go to the World Economic Forum at Davos and present on a stage. And a number of voices said to me, Julia, you can't talk about vaginas at the World Economic Forum. But it turns out I could. And it was one of my biggest learnings, is you don't shift a taboo by being quiet about it. My other learning was that instead of running away from me as I pursued world leaders down corridors, actually they wanted to know. They wanted to know, how can we help? What can we do? The other incredible thing that happened in Davos was someone said to me, you must go to Senegal. So, a year later, I went to Senegal, and guess what? I got answers to those 2 questions. Why does female genital cutting happen? Well, put very simply, it's a social norm. Now, a social norm is, again, simplistically, something I will do because I think you, as my peer group, expect it of me. It's actually a social expectation. And the power of that is extraordinary. So I will act because I think that, where's the stranger I was tangoing with at lunchtime? There you are. So imagine we're cousins. I will act because I think the stranger, whose name I've forgotten, I'm so sorry, expects of me that I will undertake this practice. In real life, I think my cousin is actually here. There she is, just flown in from the US, hello. And so I will do something because I think my cousins expect it of me. Now, we may never have shared a conversation about female genital cutting, but the expectation is so strong that it holds it in place. I want to embed it a little bit further by asking a question of you all, because we all have social norms, and here's one we practice in London. So who in the room today has had to consider removing their armpit hair? Little look around. Okay, so we've got, well, not as many as I thought, but we've got a gendered response there, right? Not most, but a lot of women put their hands up. A lot of men didn't, although some men did, which is interesting. And what we have with armpit hair is a classic social norm. So there's no legislation, there's no medical reason to do it. We're not taught at school you must remove your armpit hair. And yet there is a social code that is in place that says, I belong to this group of my peers if I undertake that practice. And actually, what holds it in place is the social shame I would feel if I didn't do it. It's a social sanction, and the power of that social sanction is so incredibly strong. Now, it's obviously a flippant comparison. We have a choice about our armpit hair and further bits of our body hair, which I won't go into. But nonetheless, I wanted to show you our own social norms and why they matter. So what on earth has this got to do with ending female genital cutting? Well, in Senegal, things are changing. So these are 3 girls that I met in a village called Saranjai. I went to Senegal and I learned about this incredible program that was started by our now partner, a charity called Tostan. And they've been working in Senegal for 25 years on a literacy and numeracy program. And what they learned was, in order to work on literacy and numeracy, you had to work on human rights first. Unless people understand that they have a human right to access things, you can't embed change. So Tostan work with the entire community, men, women, boys, and girls. And they explore with them for 6 months, what are your human rights? Through song, through dance, through drama, through conversation. And what happens in those conversations is people work out, well, okay, we have a right to life, we have a right to health, we have a right to be free from violence. They may never have constructed that before. They also learn about a universal declaration of human rights. And after 6 months is up, men, women, boys and girls collectively, for the first time, are able to talk about things that they have never talked about before. Now, what's important about a social norm is it has to shift collectively. So, I could stand up in front of you and say, I am leading us to end armpit hair removal. Follow me. I'm an individual. I just think it's atrocious. But me on my own, I will get nowhere at all. It's called the positive deviant approach. It simply doesn't work. But if together, collectively, we've gone away and we've talked to our partners or our friends and we've said, why are you getting rid of this armpit hair? Why are you doing that? You've had conversations. You've moved from positions of pluralistic ignorance to coming together. Then you could say, okay, now we're going to question this practice. That is exactly what's happening in Senegal. 6 months of human rights conversations moves to 6 months discussing health and hygiene. Now, if you've never known about hand washing and germ transmission, if you've never known about reproductive health, you have no idea what causes diarrhea, why your kids are dying from that. So you get taught these things in a community setting. But as importantly, if you've never heard of germ transmission, you may never have heard of tetanus. You may never have known that your daughters or girls in your community had died from being cut with a rusty blade. Tetanus has a 2-week incubation period. It doesn't show up at all. A girl is cut, 2 weeks go by, she's recovering, she suddenly has a high fever, it spikes, she dies. Those communities think the spirits took our daughters. Can you imagine this moment in these classes when they begin to make the causal link, when they begin to see that what they have done has resulted in the death of their daughters? So this program doesn't go in and tell people to stop mutilating. It allows them to explore and learn and share knowledge. And at the end of 30 months, the community is offered the choice, do you want to stop cutting your daughters? Not all take the choice at that point, but the majority do. The community stands up together and collectively declares an end to cutting. The social norm shifts from all girls are cut to all girls are uncut. Now, the beauty of this moment, and this is a place called Kaolack in Senegal, and that was November last year. So each woman is holding a sign with the name of her village on it. Each village brings up to 5 witnessing communities to see this moment. Those 5 may still be cutting their daughters. They may still have sons who now need to know they have to marry uncut girls. But that inherent multiplier means that they are considering now abandoning cutting their girls. It also means that the abandonment is becoming exponential. So this next slide shows some of the hundreds of witnessing people watching those communities declare. And it also shows this woman who has just burnt her ceremonial robe. She is a former cutter. She is saying, from this moment on, I will not do this practice anymore. So a word on the exponential abandonment. In 1997, one community stood up and said, we will not do this anymore. In the year 2003, 200 communities had abandoned cutting. Today, 7,600 communities across 6 West African countries have declared they will no longer cut their daughters. And the curve is continuing. So in contrast to Mekdes and Tinabab at the beginning, these girls are in a village in Kersimbara. That's in Senegal. They will never be cut. They will not even know about the practice, potentially. Senegal has had 5,500 communities declare an end to female genital cutting. Guess what? They're at tipping point. We believe that in the next 3 years, the whole of Senegal could be free from female genital cutting in its entirety. Thank you. And once that happens, the movement continues to spread across boundaries, across the world. One last point. I then went back and set up Orchid Project. We support projects like this to scale. We're looking for new solutions. We're undertaking advocacy. And it's really with great joy that I remind you of the fact foot binding in China ended in less than 10 years. Female genital cutting can do the same. Thank you.